Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. Silent Screams, the town that fear forgot. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The group of friends pulled into the heart of Elmswood as twilight draped its shadow over the quaint Midwestern town. Emma glanced at the clock on the dashboard, noting the late hour, but her anticipation made up for the darkness creeping in. "Almost there," she said, her voice steady as she maneuvered the rental car down the narrow, deserted street. Town seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to shatter the stillness. Abandoned storefronts loomed like specters in the mist, their once vibrant signs now peeling and weather-worn. The only sound was the rhythmic crunch of gravel under tires and the distant hoot of an owl. It was an unsettling contrast to the bustling cityscape they had left behind. Emma's friends, each with their own reason for the trip, peered out the windows. Mike, the skeptic, scrutinized the surroundings with a raised eyebrow. "Are you sure this is the right place?" he asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Lisa, ever the sensitive one, clutched her seatbelt tighter. "There's something off about this place. Can you feel it?" Her gaze swept over the fog-laden streets, the mist curling around lampposts like ghostly fingers. Tom, the thrill-seeker, grinned. "Perfect. Just what we need for an adventure." He was already itching to explore, eager for whatever mysteries the town might hold. Emma parked the car in front of a dilapidated inn, its neon sign flickering weakly. They all climbed out, their breaths visible in the cool evening air. As they gathered their bags, a weathered old man emerged from the shadows of a nearby alley. His eyes were sharp, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Evening, folks," he called, his voice rough like gravel. "You all here for the weekend, I reckon?" "Yep," Emma replied, attempting to sound more confident than she felt. "Just looking for a quiet getaway." The old man's gaze lingered on them, his eyes narrowing. "Well, just mind the old house at the edge of town. Folks say it's got a history. Best not to go poking around there." Before they could ask more, he turned and shuffled away, disappearing into the thickening fog. The friends exchanged uneasy glances. Tom chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "Sounds like a perfect spot to check out. What do you think, guys?" Emma looked at the old house in the distance, barely visible through the mist. Its silhouette was imposing, and an inexplicable chill ran down her spine. "Let's settle in first. We'll check it out tomorrow." As the group headed inside, the silence of Elmswood seemed to deepen, wrapping them in an eerie embrace. The house on the edge of town stood, waiting, as if the darkness itself had a secret it was desperate to keep. Chapter 2. The House. The next morning brought a somber light to Elmswood, casting a pallid glow over the town. Emma's group had spent the night in uneasy slumber, the old inn's creaks and groans amplifying their apprehension. Over breakfast, the previous day's warning echoed in their minds, fueling their curiosity. By midday, they decided to investigate the old house. Driving out to the edge of town, they found the house almost shrouded in fog, its once grand fayade now a crumbling relic. The structure loomed like a dark sentinel against the gray sky. Emma parked the car, and they stepped out, their breath mingling with the mist. The front porch was sagging, and the door, hanging ajar, creaked ominously as they pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the scent of damp rot and mildew. Sunlight filtered through grime-covered windows, casting weak beams onto the dust-choked furniture. "Here we are," Mike said, his voice echoing in the emptiness. "This place is a real dive." Tom was already moving through the house with enthusiasm, his flashlight cutting through the dimness. "Check out these old portraits," he called, holding up a dusty frame. The faces in the portraits were obscured by age and grime, their eyes seeming to follow their movements. Lisa shivered, her senses heightened by the oppressive silence. "I have a bad feeling about this place. It's like the house is watching us." Emma led the way into a grand, though decayed, living room. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing layers of faded floral patterns. Cold drafts slipped through the broken windows, making the room feel colder than the outside air. As they explored, an eerie whisper seemed to float through the air, impossible to pinpoint. Shadows seemed to dance just beyond the edge of their vision, shifting with the movement of their flashlights. "Did anyone else hear that?" Lisa's voice trembled as she clutched her arms for warmth. Emma nodded, her brow furrowed. "Let's stick together. There might be something we're not seeing." In a small study off the main hall, Tom's flashlight beam illuminated a rotting wooden desk. "Hey, check this out," he said, pulling out an old leather-bound diary and a peculiar, tarnished amulet from a drawer. Emma opened the diary, her eyes scanning the faded ink. "This talks about a curse," she said, reading aloud. "A ritual gone wrong. Something dark that was bound to the house." The amulet was engraved with strange symbols, its significance unclear but ominous. The sense of foreboding thickened as they realized the house's dark history might not be just a local legend. The cold air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, as if the house itself was reacting to their discovery. Emma glanced around, feeling the weight of the house's malevolence. "We need to leave, now." As they hurried back to the car, the house seemed to exhale a sigh, the shadows inside stretching and writhing, as though displeased by their departure. The mystery of the house had only deepened, and the group couldn't shake the feeling that they had awakened something they didn't fully understand. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Back at the inn, the oppressive atmosphere of the old house clung to them, making sleep elusive. Emma lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, her mind replaying the disturbing whispering voices and the cold draft that had swept through the house. Around her, the sounds of her friends' restless movements and murmured conversations filled the room. In the early hours, Lisa jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Her nightmare had been vivid images of dark shadows reaching out, dragging her into an abyss. She stumbled into the common room, where Mike and Tom were already up, their faces haggard. "Can't sleep," Lisa admitted, her voice shaky. "Something's wrong with this place." Tom, usually upbeat, looked pale and tense. "I keep seeing things in the corners of my eyes. It's like the house is alive." Mike, who had been trying to ignore the growing sense of dread, finally spoke up. "We need to figure out what's really going on. I'll start researching the town's history." Emma agreed, her own fears masked by determination. "Let's get to the bottom of this. We need to understand what we're dealing with." After a quick breakfast, they headed to the town library. The small, dusty building seemed to hold the secrets of Elmswood within its walls. Emma and Mike dug through old newspapers and historical records, while Lisa and Tom sifted through local archives. Hours later, Mike emerged with a stack of papers. "I found some," he said, laying out documents detailing the town's history. It seems the house was once owned by a family deeply involved in occult practices. They were rumored to have performed a ritual that went horribly wrong, leading to their disappearance and the town's slow decline. Emma scanned the records, piecing together the connection between the curse and the house. The diary mentioned something about a binding ritual. It seems like they tried to trap something dark. As they delved deeper into the research, the tension among them grew palpable. Emma noticed Mike's growing obsession with the research, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Tom was increasingly agitated, snapping at everyone and jumping at every creak of the old inn. Lisa's paranoia was escalating. She avoided mirrors and jumped at the slightest noise. The constant psychological strain was taking its toll. They gathered in the common room that evening, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. "Maybe we're just imagining things," Mike said, though his voice wavered. "Or maybe the house is messing with our heads." Tom slammed his hand on the table, frustration evident. "This isn't just in our heads. We're all seeing things, feeling things that aren't normal." Emma tried to mediate. "We need to stick together and focus on finding a solution. This place is affecting us, and we can't let it tear us apart." The group fell into a tense silence, each lost in their own spiraling thoughts. The curse of the house was more than just a story. It was a reality they were now living, and the pressure was beginning to fracture their sanity. Chapter 4. The Curse Revealed. The tension in the inn had reached a breaking point by the next morning. Emma and Mike had barely slept, their eyes bleary from the long hours of research. Lisa and Tom had retreated into their own worlds, each grappling with their personal fears. In the dim light of dawn, Emma gathered everyone in the common room, her hands trembling as she held a crumpled folder of documents. "I think we've finally found something crucial," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her. Mike, his face gaunt and eyes shadowed, nodded in agreement. The records detail an ancient ritual performed by the town's original founders. It was supposed to bind a malevolent spirit, but it went horribly wrong. Emma opened the folder, revealing a set of old sketches and faded notes. The ritual was meant to trap a dark entity, something ancient and evil. Instead, it seems they unleashed it. Lisa, her face pale, spoke up. "What does this mean for us? Is that thing still here?" Emma pointed to an old newspaper clipping. "It says the entity started feeding on the fear of the townspeople, growing stronger with each passing year. The artifact we found, this amulet, was part of the ritual. It's what kept the entity bound, but it looks like it's been damaged or tampered with." As the group absorbed this information, a cold chill swept through the room. The lights flickered, and shadows seemed to dance on the walls. Lisa's eyes widened in terror as she saw a figure standing in the corner of the room, its face obscured, but its presence undeniably menacing. "Do you see that?" Lisa's voice was barely a whisper, her hand pointing towards the apparition. Tom turned, his face contorted with fear. "It's one of those things from the house? What the hell is happening?" Emma and Mike looked at each other, their own fears surfacing. "It's the entity," Mike said, his voice trembling. "It's preying on us now. The curse is feeding off our fear." The room grew colder, and the apparition began to shift, taking on the features of their deepest fears. Emma saw visions of her past failures and regrets, while Mike was haunted by distorted reflections of his own fears and doubts. Tom saw himself trapped in a maze of shadows, and Lisa faced a relentless dark force that seemed to reach out to her with icy fingers. The group was paralyzed by their own psychological terrors. The house's malevolence was not just a physical presence, it was an insidious force that invaded their minds and souls, turning their deepest fears into reality. Emma struggled to stay focused. "We have to find a way to stop this. The amulet, if it's broken, maybe that's what's causing all this." The friends, now more determined than ever, knew they had to confront the entity head-on. The curse had revealed its true nature, and it was up to them to break free from its grip before it consumed them completely. Chapter 5. The Descent. The once subdued fear in the inn had exploded into a frenzy of terror by nightfall. Cold, oppressive atmosphere had thickened, and the supernatural occurrences intensified. The shadowy figures from their nightmares were now an unrelenting reality, haunting every corner of the inn. Emma, Mike, Lisa, and Tom huddled together in the common room, their faces etched with fear. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows, creating a distorted dance of darkness on the walls. Outside, the wind howled, making the old building groan and shudder as if it were alive. Lisa, her eyes wide with panic, clutched her blanket tightly. "I can't take this anymore. It feels like the house is closing in on us." Tom, his face pale, paced back and forth. "We need to get out of here. We should have never stayed. Why didn't we leave when we had the chance?" Mike slammed his hand on the table, frustration and fear evident in his voice. "We're cut off. The phone lines are down, and we can't get a signal. It's like we're trapped here." Emma, trying to remain composed, said, "We need to stay calm. Panicking won't help us. We need to focus on fixing the amulet and breaking the curse." But the house had other plans. As Emma spoke, the room grew colder, and an oppressive silence enveloped them. The shadows seemed to grow longer and darker, and the whispers returned, now louder and more insidious. The apparitions from their nightmares began to take shape, each one a manifestation of their deepest fears. Lisa's face contorted with terror as she saw her greatest fears come to life, ghostly figures of loved ones lost, their faces twisted in anguish. "No, please, make it stop." Tom's eyes darted around, his skin crawling as he saw the walls close in, covered in dark, writhing tendrils. "We're being suffocated. We're not going to get out of here." Mike, his skepticism shattered, was haunted by a vision of himself failing everyone around him, his every mistake replayed in horrific detail. "We're doomed. We should have never come here. I knew this was a bad idea." Emma's resolve was cracking. The entity's malevolent power was exploiting their fears, driving wedges between them. Arguments erupted, each person blaming the others for their predicament. "We're all going to die because of this," Tom shouted. "We should have left." Lisa broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I can't stand this anymore. I just want it to end." Emma tried to mediate, but the weight of their fear and distrust was too heavy. "We need to focus on the amulet and find a way to break this curse. If we don't, we're done for." As the night dragged on, the friends' fear and paranoia mounted, the entity feeding on their terror and discord. The descent into horror was complete, and the once close-knit group was now fractured and desperate, fighting to hold onto their sanity in the face of the relentless darkness that threatened to consume them. Chapter 6: The Final Confrontation. The air in the inn was thick with despair and exhaustion as the night deepened. Emma, Mike, Lisa, and Tom sat in the flickering light of the common room, their faces drawn and haunted. Their earlier arguments had subsided into a grim determination. They knew they had reached the end of their tether. Emma stood, clutching the battered amulet. "We can't stay here any longer. The entity is feeding off our fear, and it's getting stronger. We need to confront it and use this artifact to break the curse." Mike, his face pallid with a mix of resolve and dread, nodded. "We have to try. If this doesn't work, there's no way out." Lisa, her eyes red and swollen from tears, took a deep breath. "What if it doesn't work? What if we end up making things worse?" Emma put a hand on Lisa's shoulder. "We don't have a choice. This is our only chance." Tom, his fear giving way to grim determination, picked up a flashlight and checked its batteries. "Let's get this over with." The group moved slowly, their footsteps echoing ominously as they approached the house. The fog had thickened, and the wind howled with an almost sentient malice. The old house loomed ahead, its dark windows like unblinking eyes. Inside, the house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, the shadows lengthening and shifting unnaturally. Every creak and groan of the house felt like a warning. They ascended the staircase, each step amplifying their collective anxiety. In the grand room where they had found the amulet, the temperature had dropped significantly. The air was so cold it felt like ice against their skin. The room was filled with an oppressive darkness, the whispers louder and more insistent. The walls seemed to pulsate with a malevolent energy. Emma placed the amulet on the old altar, the one described in the diary. We need to activate it. There should be a sequence to the ritual. As she chanted the words from the diary, the shadows coalesced into horrifying forms, twisting, writhing figures that reached out with ghostly hands. The entity roared in fury, its presence overwhelming. Tom and Mike stood guard, their flashlights casting weak beams against the encroaching darkness. Lisa, trembling, watched as the figures of her nightmares advanced. Emma, hurry. The air crackled with energy as Emma completed the incantation. The amulet glowed with a fierce light, and the shadows screamed in rage. The darkness recoiled, the malevolent force struggling against the artifact's power. The final confrontation was a maelstrom of terror and struggle. Emma was forced to face her deepest fears, her past failures, her sense of responsibility. Mike battled his own demons, fighting to remain steady as the entity tried to exploit his doubts. In a moment of desperate clarity, Emma realized that to truly end the curse, a sacrifice was needed. She grabbed the amulet, her hand shaking. We need to destroy it. It's the only way. With a final, determined push, Emma hurled the amulet into the fireplace, where it shattered into a burst of blinding light. The entity's scream echoed through the house, and the shadows dissipated, leaving the room in eerie silence. Exhausted and battered, the friends stared at the remnants of the amulet, the oppressive weight of the curse lifting from their shoulders. They had survived, at a great cost. The entity was vanquished, but the price of their ordeal was etched deeply into their hearts. Chapter 7. The Aftermath. Dawn broke over Elmswood, casting a pale, uncertain light over the town. The once feared house stood silent and still, its dark presence diminished, but not forgotten. Emma, Mike, Lisa, and Tom emerged from the ruin, their faces haggard, their steps heavy with exhaustion. As they walked back to the inn, the weight of their ordeal pressed heavily upon them. The air was eerily calm, and the town seemed to be holding its breath, as if waiting for something. The lingering fog had begun to clear, but the chill remained, a stark reminder of the night's horrors. Inside the inn, the survivors sat in a subdued circle, the silence between them punctuated only by the occasional creak of the building. Emma stared at her hands, still trembling from the final confrontation. "We did it," she said quietly. "But at what cost?" Mike rubbed his temples, haunted by the memories. "The things we saw, what we went through, it's going to stay with us forever. I can't shake the feeling that we didn't truly escape. That house, it's evil. It's still there in some way." Lisa, who had been staring blankly at the floor, looked up with tear-filled eyes. "I feel like I'm drowning in guilt. We survived, but at what cost? How many others might suffer if that curse ever comes back?" Tom was pacing restlessly, his face a mask of unresolved pain. "We need to leave. Get out of this place and never look back. But part of me can't stop thinking about that amulet. Did we really destroy it all?" Emma nodded, her resolve faltering. "We need to get back to the city, to find some sense of normalcy. But that artifact, it might be gone. But what if its dark influence isn't completely over? What if it still lingers? As they packed their belongings, Emma took one last look around the inn. The house and the artifact had been destroyed, but the echoes of their terror lingered in the corners of their minds. She felt a pang of sorrow for the town, a place that had been consumed by darkness and had claimed so much. The group drove out of Elmswood, the town shrinking in the rearview mirror. The road ahead was long, and the silence in the car was punctuated by the hum of the engine. The friends were united by their shared trauma, but divided by the burden of their survivor's guilt. As they reached the outskirts of town, Lisa glanced back. "Do you think the curse will come back?" Mike shook his head, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "I hope not. But if it does, we won't be here to face it." The amulet's remnants were left behind, buried deep in the ashes of the fireplace. Its destruction was not absolute. Its dark legacy remained a shadowy whisper, hinting at the possibility that the curse could resurface. As they drove away, the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow on the road ahead. Yet, the fear and uncertainty they carried with them were reminders that some horrors never fully fade. They linger, waiting for another chance to emerge from the darkness. Chapter 8. The Haunting Echo. The months following their escape from Elmswood were a blur of recovery and disorientation for Emma, Mike, Lisa, and Tom. They returned to their respective lives, but the shadows of their ordeal lingered, casting a pall over their attempts at normalcy. Emma had moved back to her apartment in New York, but her once bustling city now felt strangely distant and hollow. She found herself jumping at every unexpected sound, the memory of the house's eerie whispers haunting her dreams. Her once steady hands now trembled at the slightest provocation, and she avoided mirrors, fearful of seeing the shadows of her past. Mike had thrown himself into work, trying to bury his trauma under a mountain of deadlines. Yet, in the quiet moments, the echoes of his past failures and the house's malevolent presence still gnawed at him. He found himself obsessively researching occult symbols, trying to convince himself that he could control the fear rather than being controlled by it. Lisa had moved to a quieter part of town, attempting to escape the nightmares that had plagued her since their ordeal. She began therapy, but the sessions often veered into the realm of the supernatural. Her therapist struggled to address fears that seemed all too real, and Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness she had encountered was still lurking just beyond the edge of her consciousness. Tom had tried to regain his adventurous spirit, but his enthusiasm was tempered by an underlying anxiety. He'd become paranoid, constantly checking locks and avoiding darkened areas. His sense of security was shattered, and he found himself unable to fully trust anyone, convinced that the curse was not truly gone. As they each grappled with their personal demons, an unsettling sense of déjà vu began to creep into their lives. Emma received an anonymous package at her apartment. Inside was a small, tarnished object, a fragment of the amulet they had destroyed. A note accompanied it, written in an old, shaky hand: "The darkness never truly fades." The package's arrival was timed with a series of inexplicable events. Emma noticed the lights flickering more frequently, and shadows seemed to twist and writhe in her peripheral vision. Her dreams grew darker and more vivid, filled with ominous whispers and chilling laughter. Emma's heart raced as she looked at the fragment. The fear that she had tried so hard to leave behind was back, more tangible and terrifying than before. Her hand trembled as she held the object, realizing with growing dread that the curse had not been fully vanquished. The malevolent force seemed to be regrouping, preparing for another chance to strike. The final scene unfolded as Emma stared at the fragment, a sinister realization settling in. The horror was not over. It had merely taken a breath, waiting in the shadows for the right moment to re-emerge. The curse's echo lingered, a dark whisper in the back of her mind, leaving her and the readers questioning whether the nightmare was truly over or just beginning again.